Okay, welcome back to members of 121 Community Church in Grapevine, Texas. Their ongoing study in the book on Being a Christian by Hans Kuhn, published way back in 1976. We get into very positive content now. Professor Kuhn is going to turn to the topic of the doctrine of Christology. We'll look at pages 122 to 132. We'll look at Jesus as the Christ, the concrete signs of Christ, and Christology as doctrine, or Christology as dogma. Let's begin with block 1. And we're told that we must take concepts at their face value. Jesus as Christ is that which is unique about Christianity, and decisive for man's relationship to God, and archetypal for man, as the concept of Christos. Jesus is Christos. Christ as archetypal. Christianity today faces a secular humanism that also stands for human value, and the church seeks to be relevant in that modern society. And that means being founded on positing that Christ can always be freshly known, Christ can always be newly acknowledged. But we're warned by Professor Kuhn that Christianity cannot simply mimic humanism. Therefore, for block 1, our conclusion, Christ as mediator, Christ as archetypal, means positing a church relevance that transcends humanism. It's done by activating, and this is his term, it is done by activating the memory of Christ. Ministry and proclamation for Kuhn is activating the memory of Christ, not through forming abstract axioms, but by recalling Christ through Eucharist, through baptism, through authoritative Scripture. Therefore, recalling Christ in sacrament as activation of memory. Proclamation becomes praxis ministry for Professor Kuhn. Christian is everything of positive relevance, of positive reference to the person of Christ. It's a personalism of sorts. It's a positive reference to the person of Christ, and where Christ is ultimately decisive. Christian concepts are grasped through concrete praxis. And remember the Greek definition for praxis: action and reflection in a concrete historical situation. All of this is committed to the one Christ, says Professor Kuhn. So block 1 gives us the theoretical. Now let's move on and take a look at the practical in block 2. The concrete signs of Christ. Knowledge of Christ comes from Christian piety. He is known as Sweet Jesus, Christ our hero, the Sacred Heart. Some theologians have developed a theology of the personal center, but poetry and reality should not be confused. Poetry and the real should not be confused. So he asks the question, what is the true image of Christ? The image of Christ has been variously posited as kind-hearted shepherd, man of sorrows, king and judge, suffering servant, meek and mild. But he concludes poetic signs of Christ and true image of Christ equals the question, what is the real of Christ? In antiquity, Christ was basically described in Hellenistic concepts. Christ was Greek thinker, or eventually Constantine's Christ. In the Middle Ages, Christ was Neoplatonic speculative thinking, or the Christ of Thomas Aquinas, meaning Aristotelian Christ. In modern times, it's Christ of the Reformation, or Christ of the Roman popes, or Christ of the Tübingen school of German idealists, or Christ of the French postmodernist rereading of German ideology, or is it Barth, is it Bultmann, is it Tillich, or is it Billy Graham? Very relevant and definite relevant questioning here, because he's absolutely right. I mean, when I went through divinity school, who did I study? I studied Barth, Bultmann, and Tillich. And that is what you are taught in seminary or divinity school. So it is very definitely an accurate question to ask at the concrete level. Who is the real Christ? Is he the Christ of Barth? Is he the Christ of Bultmann? Is he the Christ of Tillich? Or is he the Christ of Billy Graham? So we get the theoretical in block 1, a very powerful theoretical, by the way, where Christ as mediator and Christ as archetypal means that we posit a church relevance that transcends secular humanism. And it's always in reference to the person of Christ. We posit personhood. We posit subject. We posit the history of the person of Christ. And we do it through concrete praxis, not theoretical axioms, but concrete praxis. And so in other words, doctrine is founded on praxis for Professor Kuhn. On the practical side, or the concrete side, we have a variety of concrete positings that we have to differentiate between. And if you've ever been a student at seminary or divinity school, you will have been confronted by the Christ of Barth, the Christ of Bultmann, the Christ of Tillich, and even the conservative Christ of Billy Graham. You will confront these different teachings in seminary or divinity school for sure. When I was at Bright Divinity School, the emphasis was on Bultmann and Tillich. They were a school that supported Bultmann and Tillich exclusively, so I had very in-depth teaching on Bultmann and Tillich. I brought with me to divinity school a strong interest in Jürgen Moltmann and his theology, so I was there from a very conservative perspective, but I had a great balanced teaching because I got a great teaching on Bultmann and Tillich while at Bright Divinity School, so I'm very thankful for that. Professor Kuhn goes on, and he says, okay, I've given you the theoretical in block 1, I've given you the concrete in block 2. Now, let's ask the question, what is Christology as doctrine? Block 3. The Christ of dogma. Christian theology is a work of discovery, an ongoing work of discovery. It is an ongoing work of discovery because it's praxis-based. It's more than piety, it's more than art. It is the substance of the church's teaching, the Christ of the church, not simply the equation Jesus equals God. That was proven in the church councils to be heresy. The Christ of the church, Jesus equals God, is a heretical one-sidedness. The Council of Nicaea, 325 AD, said that Jesus is co-substantial with the Father. Council of Chalcedon, 451 AD, said he was also co-substantial with humanity. In other words, the doctrine of the divine hypostasis, hypostatic union, but I'd like to use the Greek term, hypostasis. Hypostasis in the Greek, I will give you the precise definition in the Art and Gingrich lexicon. It is hypostasis, substantial nature, essence, actual being, reality, exact representation. My own preference in that definition from Art and Gingrich, which is really the authoritative Greek lexicon today, and it was in 1976 as well, but my preference is hypostasis as the real, as reality, as co-substantial reality. But let's take a look at the conclusion to the lesson by Professor Kuhn. Let's go to Block 3, Note 3 and 4. Christ of dogma and Christ of church equals Christ as divine hypostasis. Church councils cannot claim infallibility. Today the problem of Christology is even a deeper problem. It is not the Platonic, passionless Christ. The work of translation must be continued since Chalcedon, translating the doctrine of the two natures. We go on further translating the doctrine of the two natures, says Professor Kuhn. It has not been settled. That was the Chalcedonian doctrine of 451 AD, It is a beginning, not an end in itself. It has problems. The doctrine bears the imprint of Hellenistic language. It led to logical dilemmas. It is not identical with the New Testament message about Christ. Christology cannot be reduced to Calvin's triple office doctrine of prophet, priest, king, and we also have the continuity of the believing community to examine as well. So he concludes by telling us that yes, we will posit the notion of divine hypostasis for our Christology. However, we have to do ongoing work of translation, work of interpretation, work of clarification. That is precisely what he's saying here. The Chalcedonian doctrine, as far as that goes, the Council of Nicaea or the Council of Chalcedon, they are not infallible. They are starting points. They are beginning points along with the New Testament. They are places where we begin, but we need to do the ongoing work of translation discovery. He calls it the work of translation. He means work of interpretation, but we need to do ongoing work of interpretation of the doctrine of divine hypostasis. And I don't care what seminary you went to, I don't care what divinity school you went to, I don't care what undergrad Christian college you went to. If you think you ever got a precise definition of divine hypostasis, I'd like to hear it, because there's so many varying definitions that I don't think there is a exact precise definition of the mysterion of divine hypostasis. It is mysterion. Let's face it, it is a divine mystery. So it's not a once and for all thing you can nail down conceptually, as it should be. It should be something that transcends concept, something beyond concept. Divine hypostasis should be beyond concept. That's why Artin Gingrich has multiple definitions: substantial nature, essence, actual being, reality, exact representation. And I take this Greek term hypostasis, and I'm immediately led to another Greek term, exousia. And in the Greek New Testament, exousia is always translated authority. But it means, in a literal sense, exousia means out of the essence of, out of the ousia essence. Christ comes out of the ousia essence of the divine. So I really, in my own studies, I almost equate hypostasis with exousia. Out of one essence, one ousia essence. Exousia, to me, would be the real of hypostasis. But it is not a conceptual definition that we can nail down dogmatically. And that's what Professor Kuhn is telling us. Professor Kuhn is telling us there is always ongoing work of discovery, ongoing work of interpretation, ongoing work of conceptual definition of Christology as doctrine. We do take Chalcedon as starting point. He says that. It's where we begin, not where we end. It's not an end in itself. We begin with Chalcedon, the doctrine of divine hypostasis. We do not end it there by any means. And there has never been a definitive conceptual definition that I've ever found for the Greek concept of divine hypostasis. Like I said, for me, and I firmly believe this, but I firmly believe that exousia, which is co-substantial authority, means in a literal sense out of, ousia, essence, out of the essence of the divine. So I take hypostasis for myself, and this is not dogmatic by any means, okay? It's just my opinion. I take hypostasis as almost synonymous with exousia, out of the ousia essence of the divine. A divine reality, an exousia reality. But remember that theoretically, when we write Christian Christology, we are writing to affirm and posit the person of Jesus Christ, his personhood. That's our theoretical stand, based on concrete praxis. On the concrete side, we do investigate contributions from Barth, contributions from Bultmann, contributions from Tillich, contributions from conservative Billy Graham. But Christology is beyond concept. And we reach the conclusion of starting with Chalcedonian Council work, the doctrine of divine hypostasis. And that's why he concludes with Block 3, Note 3, that Christology is a work of translating, which he means they're interpreting the doctrine of two natures. We do not recognize Chalcedonian doctrine as an end in itself. It has Hellenistic imprint. It has some issues, some logic issues. And not only that, but hypostasis is beyond concept in reality. It's a mysterion mystery. It's a mysterion mystery of divine truth and unity of the triune Godhead. That's going to wrap up pages 122 to 132. Wonderful first Christology by Professor Kuhn. I'm very impressed with the groundwork he lays for Christology. We will continue in the next lesson with Christology even further, but we get the groundwork for his position on Christology in these 10 pages. We'll pick up next time on page 133.